quarterback, tight end, and defense rankings. Let's run through them. Starting off with the GOAT of fantasy football this year, Lamar Jackson. The man's been unbeatable. You have one game with fewer than 23 fantasy points, and he had 17 and a half, right? He's by far and away the QB1. Nobody can touch him. It's a great matchup. Applied team total, 29 and a half points going up against the Washington Commanders. His underdog pick'em's like higher or lower, 58 and a half rushing yards. Please, for the love of God, understand Lamar is QB1. Even if it is a 6-point passing touchdown format, you have to have him here. Jalen Hurts QB2, maybe this is what people have an issue with. Yeah, Hurts was very bad in week 4. Yeah, Hurts was very bad in week 3. But also, you had no A.J. Brown and you had no Devonta Smith here for about 6 of these quarters. So going into the future, I expect that Jalen Hurts goes right back to who he was before. Through the first 2 weeks, Jalen Hurts was averaging about 22 fantasy points per game. This matchup against the Cleveland Browns, you'd have an implied team total of 26 points. And then we will have Jaden Daniels right after this. Obviously, Daniels has been absolutely incredible. Daniels is looking like he's taking the torch from CJ Stroud and potentially going to follow up on the best quarterback season of all time with something maybe even a little bit better. Now, going over to our next tier, Josh Allen, how the mighty have fallen. Now, obviously, we're not moving him down that much, but I don't think we can consider him a tier 1 quarterback, and that he has just been way too unpredictable. Where, yes, he's the only quarterback in fantasy this year to have multiple games over 30 fantasy points. But at the same time, he's had 2 games under 10 fantasy points. Going up against the Jets, you have an implied team total of only about 21 and a half points. The passing volume is not going to come close to some of the other quarterbacks that are in these rankings, but obviously the saving grace for Allen is you still can expect that he gets some rushing production. Going over and looking at his underdog pick'em for this next week, he is higher, lower, 34 and a half rushing yards. Now, our next guy will be Kyler Murray. Now, with Mr. Kyler, he is actually my favorite underdog pick'em of the week, at least at quarterback. We are going higher than 33 and a half rushing yards, where if you look at what he has done so far this season as a rusher, he's given you 57, 59, 45, 3, and then 83 rushing yards. This has made him a must-start option every single week. He is currently averaging slightly fewer than 20 fantasy points per game. But right now, this game between the Green Bay Packers and the Arizona Cardinals has an over-under of about 50 total points. Should be extremely high scoring. Not only is it going to be high scoring, but the Arizona Cardinals should be forcing Kyler Murray to drop back a decent amount in the second half to play keep up with the Packers. But of course, if you wanted to tail us on that Kyler Murray higher than 33 and a half total rushing yards pick, you can find that link in the description and comment section over to Underdog Fantasy, available in damn near every state. And if you use promo code FLOCK, you will get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you will get a free Brock Purdy pick, more than less than half a total yard for tonight's game. And you're going to be getting hooked up with a free team review in the live stream that we're doing every single night through flockfantasy.com. Now, moving this over to our next quarterback, we are going to look at Joe Burrow. I want to be on record. Obviously, I understand that Burrow will have significantly more passing yards. Burrow will have more passing touchdowns than both Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, and honestly, Lamar, Hurts, and Daniels. At this point, I think you can assume that Burrow is the favorite to lead the NFL in passing touchdowns when it's all said and done. I mean, right now you're looking at 12 passing touchdowns through the first 5 weeks. Now, the hesitation that you have to have here is just in a 4-point passing touchdown format, he is going to be at a disadvantage compared to the guys that can run the ball, just because running is a cheat code in fantasy. If you're playing in a league where you only get 4 points per passing touchdown and 1 point per 25 passing yards, is there, the quarterbacks are a little bit nerfed. Now, going over to our next guy, we are going to be looking at Jordan Love. Right now, the Green Bay Packers actually have the second highest implied team total of any team in the NFL this week. And actually, the underdog pick'ems with Jordan Love are pretty much identical to what you have with Joe Burrow. He's higher, lower, 261 and a half passing yards. Should be all the passing volume in this offense. You start Jaden Reed. You're excited about Tucker Kraft. Obviously, you start Kraft. You should be excited about Josh Jacobs. You pretty much want everybody in your lineup in Green Bay this week. Dak Prescott's actually in a really good spot against the Detroit Lions, where we've seen the Lions be a pass funnel so far this season. Let's actually go ahead and let's look this up for fun. Last week against the Seattle Seahawks, you had a total of 56 pass attempts for Geno Smith. The week prior against the Arizona Cardinals, you had 34 pass attempts for Kyler Murray. you add in the rushing attempts, Kyler Murray had about 40 dropbacks. We go back the week before this against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You only had 24 total dropbacks from Baker Mayfield, but it's a game that the Bucs win. And then against the Matthew Stafford Los Angeles Rams in week 1, you're looking at 49 pass attempts from Stafford. It's a defense that's going to want you to throw it. This is an offense in Dallas that's probably going to have to do so to keep up with the Detroit Lions, where the Lions right now are favored in this game by about 3 points. The Lions are tied with the Packers, supposedly being the second highest scoring offense in the NFL this week. So honestly, with the injuries that you have on the defensive side of the football for the Dallas Cowboys, I think Dak Prescott's a strong play. And then CJ Stroud down here at 9. Obviously, before the Nico Collins injury, we had CJ Stroud ahead of Dak, ahead of Love, up there in the same tier with Kyler and Burrow. The issue is you lose your alpha wide receiver 1, and on top of it, you're playing the New England Patriots, where you're simply just not going to have to throw the ball, right? I mean, right now, you are touchdown favorites with an implied team total of only about 22 points. Now, dropping down to our next tier, these are the streaming players. If you had one of those top 9 quarterbacks, or I don't want to include Dak there, but if you have one of those top alphas, obviously you only start one guy every week. If you have Josh Allen, you don't need a roster or backup. This is the range where you have to be playing the matchups. Kirk Cousins has a really good matchup going up against the Carolina Panthers. Right now, you have an implied team total of 26.75 points for the Atlanta Falcons. This is the highest projection we have seen for this Atlanta Falcons offense all year. Cousins currently on Underdog is higher, lower, 254.5 passing yards. Baker Mayfield has been phenomenal. Now, Baker Mayfield going up against the New Orleans Saints with no Derek Carr. We assume that the Saints probably slow the pace of play down. Probably not too many plays running this game. Actually, if you are looking at Baker, he's higher, lower, 236.5 passing yards. And yes, he had the rushing production last week, but ultimately that's a massive outlier where we hadn't seen that type of rushing production from Baker Mayfield since I believe 2019 or 2020 when we looked it up. But a quarterback that you should have the rushing stats from will be Justin Fields. Going up against the Raiders, however, this is probably one of those games in which you are able to just see the Pittsburgh Steelers lean on the run, not to have to ask a ton for Justin Fields. Where, I mean, yes, over the past few weeks, like against the Dallas Cowboys, you see the 27 pass attempts. Against the Indianapolis Colts, you see the 34 pass attempts. Against the Chargers, you see the 32 pass attempts. You look at weeks 1 and 2, where they really controlled these games against Atlanta and Denver. There you only had 23 and 20 pass attempts for Fields. Against the Raiders, I think maybe we get a little more of a Justin Fields week 1 or week 2 performance. Anthony Richardson is our next guy. Obviously, Rich has been horrible. Week 1, you had the ceiling where you had the 27-point performance because he went out there rushing and you had the rushing touchdown. 1, we don't even know if Anthony Richardson's going to play. And 2, if he does play, you're not going to have Pittman. Brock Purdy is the quarterback that I'm probably going to be stuck starting on Thursday night. And this is the thing that if you have A-Rich and Purdy like I do, you probably need to go ahead and just start Purdy on Thursday night if A-Rich is not cleared before the Thursday night game. With Brock Purdy, I'm not in love with it. Playing in Seattle, you have an implied team total of 25.5 points. Right now, if you're looking at Underdog Pick'ems, they have Purdy higher, lower, 253.5 passing yards, which is, I guess, about the same range as Cousins, which is why they're in the same tier. Jared Goff will be your next guy. If you are looking at Goff going up against Dallas, right now, sportsbooks have this as the second highest scoring offense in the NFL, tied there with the Green Bay Packers at 27.75 points. Jared Goff obviously is in an offense, however, that probably wants to run the ball over and over and over again, which is why it's going to be the tier behind Jordan Love. And then I can already hear you screaming at me, and I mean screaming at me in the live chat right now that we are lower on Geno Smith than everybody else. Guys, he's in the same tier. If you want to go Geno over Cousins, you do you. All I would ask is please don't start Geno over Dak. Please don't start Geno over Love. Don't start Geno over Burrow, Kyler, Allen. Don't start him over one of the guys that are a tier ahead of him. But obviously, going up against the Niners, we should probably see a ton of passing volume, which is what we've had in a lot of these games in Seattle, where I wouldn't be surprised if Geno's leading the NFL in pass attempts, where in week 2, you have 44 pass attempts. Week 4, you get 56. And this past week, you get 40. Now, going over to what we have with our next tier, guys, Caleb, Daniel Jones, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, and Aaron Rodgers. Caleb Williams is the most exciting out of these players for this week, and Caleb Williams has by far and away the most upside out of these players this week. But obviously, Daniel Jones has a decent matchup going up against the Bengals. Now, going over to the tight end position. Tier 1, these are the locked and loaded studs that you are starting every week, regardless of the matchup. We're going to start it off with George Kittle, where if you look at Kittle, his production this season actually is reminiscent of what you have with some receivers and not typically a tight end. Where right now on Underdog, he is higher, lower, 48.5 receiving yards. You've had 2 games this season with 20 fantasy points. I mean, right now he's averaging about, I want to say 16 points per game, not even in a tight end premium format. So Kittle clearly has been the best tight end in fantasy. Now, with that being said, I do think we get some natural touchdown regression soon. Now, Trey McBride will be our next option. McBride actually has a better receiving yards mark on Underdog than Kittle at 51.5 receiving yards, higher or lower, but I think Kittle's a little more likely to get the touchdown. And then Brock Bowers will be the third tight end in this tier. You can make an argument to move Bowers ahead of Kittle or McBride, coming off a game where he drops 23 points. You get the 12 targets. All I would ask is, let's make sure if we are doing that, you have no Devontae Adams. I think if Adams plays, you honestly may drop Bowers. Still at 3, but to the tier below. Jake Ferguson will be our next player. Over the past 3 weeks, Jake Ferguson's had 25 targets. I mean, for a tight end to be averaging over 8 targets a game, it is a cheat code in fantasy football this year. Going up against the Detroit Lions, we are expecting a ton of passing volume for Dak Prescott, while at the same time, you don't have Brandon Cooks, so Jake Ferguson should see a considerable amount of targets. Right now, he's higher, lower, 50.5 receiving yards on Underdog. Sam Laporta will be my next player here. I need Laporta to come through for us. Laporta has clearly not been anything close to the tight end 1 in fantasy, which is what we had him ranked as coming into the year. He had the best rookie tight end season of all time last year. He starts off very slow through the first 4 weeks. Now, here's what I'm hoping. And this is probably just copium, and this is probably a prayer that's never going to get answered. And I'm just doing it because I have Sam Laporta on all my teams. Is I'm hoping we look back and go, oh, do y'all remember when Sam Laporta's hamstring injury that held him out pretty much all of training camp, lingered into the start of the year, then he had the ankle injury in week 3. He started off slow, but after the bye week, he came out fully healthy and he crushed and turned back into the guy that he was as a rookie. That's what I hope we are saying a week from now. We did see a season high 89% of the snaps against the Seattle Seahawks this past week, but it is not looking good so far, where he is averaging about 38 receiving yards per game, and his Underdog higher lower is only 41.5, which is much lower than someone like Ferguson. Now, our next guy will be Tucker Kraft. And honestly, if you go through and look at Tucker Kraft, assuming that you have a no Christian Watson, I think you could move Kraft ahead of Laporta. His higher lower with receiving yards on Underdog is 37.5. But I am honestly looking at the addition of these other receivers coming into Green Bay, probably taking a few targets from him. And then Dalton Kincaid, I'm really hoping he comes through, but he hasn't been a consistent target in an offense that's been worse than we are expecting. I don't know why we get another Jets game on prime time, just as a quick side note. Now, going over to what we have with our next tier players, we're going to have Kyle Pitts and Dallas Goedert. Kyle Pitts finally came through this past week, where you get the 16 fantasy points, you get the 8 targets, the 7 receptions, the 88 receiving yards, all of which were a season high for Pitts. But also, what you needed for this is you needed 500 passing yards for Kirk Cousins. Is that going to happen again? Probably not. Now, Dallas Goedert obviously has been one of the best tight ends in fantasy football so far. The past 2 weeks leading into the bye, Dallas Goedert was averaging 20 fantasy points per game. However, if we look at the first 2 weeks, when you had A.J. Brown, when you had Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert was averaging 7 fantasy points per game. Now, do I think he goes back to averaging 7 fantasy points per game through the rest of the season? Probably not. Do I think he goes right back to averaging 20 fantasy points per game when we get A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith back in this offense? Definitely not. Now, going down to our next tier, this is the I have no idea tier. I'm still assuming rest of season that David Njoku and Evan Ingram are better than the waiver wire tight ends, which are going to make up pretty much everybody after this. Obviously, for this week, as we are sitting here with really no answer on what's been happening with Njoku and Ingram so far this season with the injuries. We finally get Njoku back this past week, and with how bad the offense is, he doesn't really do anything. He only plays 42% of the snaps. I don't know. I mean, I think that you could very easily play any of the streaming tight ends over him. Streaming tight ends, Pat Frymuth in here 12. Like I said, I think you can very easily rank Frymuth ahead of Njoku, Evan Ingram. If you watch the Flock League video this week, though, you'll see that your boy, not a fan of Pat Frymuth. And with Frymuth, he is only averaging 5 targets a game. He's only had 1 game this season with double-digit fantasy points. Dalton Schultz has not had a single game this season with double-digit fantasy points, but you actually see his snap rate go up to 99% this past week, which is a season high. We get a season high 6 targets, a season high 4 receptions, a season high 34 receiving yards. And without Nico Collins, Schultz is probably going to be better than he's been. Going over to Cole Kmet, you have 1 game this season with over 10 fantasy points. So that was in a game where you had no Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen's back in. We are seeing more targets get funneled through the receivers. Cade Otton has had 1 game with more than 10 fantasy points this year. And in that game, you had 11. With that being said, he is playing close to 100% of the snaps every single week. Over the past 3 weeks, he's had 21 targets. He's averaging 7 targets per contest. Isaiah Likely will be our next tight ends. Obviously, Isaiah Likely scores 2 touchdowns in the most exciting game in the NFL last week. But with that being said, the man had 3 targets. So now if you're looking at over the past 3 weeks with Isaiah Likely, he is sitting here with a total of 6 targets, averaging 2 targets a game, and a 3-man tight end by committee. Mark Andrews will be our next name. Am I excited to start the tight end that so far this season is sitting with a whopping 14 targets? Andrews is averaging 3 targets a game, slightly less actually. No, I'm not excited to start him. Tyler Conklin has had a ton of target volume, at least over the past 3 weeks. Tyler Conklin sitting here with a total of 23 targets. Now the issue is it's a very bad offense, a very poor quarterback play, at least for the efficiency perspective of what we've had so far this season. And you have the lowest implied team total of any other tight end in this tier. And then dropping down to the tier below this, Zach Ertz, you have 8 targets last week, and off of 8 targets, you get 3 fantasy points. He's had 1 game hitting double-digit points. Hunter Henry has had 1 game hitting double-digit points. And Mike Gesicki has had 1 game hitting double-digit points. Not really excited about any of those guys. Now, going over to defenses, I always have to give the warning here. I am trying my best, but I went years without playing with defenses in fantasy football. So please be nice. If you have a strong opinion and you think you need to correct the record and say, oh no, the Raiders need to be higher than this, please leave it in the comment section in a kind way. But anyway, tier 1, we are going to have these Steelers, Texans, Chargers, Eagles defenses. So the Steelers defense has been great. At minimum, every single game this year, you've had at least 2 sacks. Over the past 3 weeks, you've had 5 forced fumbles. You've had 6 interceptions through the first 5 weeks. You're playing the Las Vegas Raiders with Aiden O'Connell under center that have an implied team total under 17 points. Steelers, great spot. Going over to the Texans defense has been garbage this season. The Texans defense currently ranks 24th in fantasy points, at least in the format that I play in. They aren't really generating sacks. Over the past 2 weeks, they have a total of 2 sacks. They have 1 forced fumble all year. They only have 3 interceptions all year. But they get to play Drake May behind the worst offensive line in the NFL with the worst wide receiver core in the NFL. So right now, the New England Patriots have the lowest implied team total of the league this week with only 15.5 points. And that is an offense that you want to attack. Now, the Los Angeles Chargers will be our next defense. The Chargers are going up against the Denver Broncos. They are favored. They had a strong defense early in the year against other weak opponents. They had 6 sacks total against the Raiders and the Panthers. They had 2 interceptions in those games. They had 2 fumble recoveries in those games. So this is another one of those strong matchups going up against Bo Nix, where the Broncos only have an implied team total of 16.5 points. The Philadelphia Eagles have had a garbage defense so far this season. So far this year, you've only had 6 sacks through 4 weeks. You've only had 1 forced fumble. You've only had 2 interceptions. But with that being said, you are playing Deshaun Watson in the Cleveland Browns, who have one of the lowest implied team totals in the NFL this week, with only 17 points. And since the Eagles are favored by about 9 points in this game, we should probably expect we get a considerable amount of dropbacks and pass attempts from Deshaun Watson, which should be very exciting if you're the opposing defense. Now, the Denver Broncos will be our next defense. Obviously, the Broncos have been one of the best defenses in the NFL so far this year. I mean, right now, you're looking at them with 19 total sacks. Yes, 19 total sacks against the Raiders. They just came away with 3 interceptions and the touchdown as well. They're the 4th in total points scored at the defense position in the league settings that I play in. The Chargers only have an implied team total of 19 points. Now, obviously, we really don't want to be playing defenses with excitement as tier 1 options if they're not even the favorites in their game. So I'll put the Broncos here at the top of tier 2, obviously a defense that needs to be started. The Bucs, strong defense. I mean, obviously, over the past 2 weeks, you're sitting with the total of 10 sacks, which has been really exciting. The thing is, you're going up against the New Orleans Saints team with no Derek Carr. Rookie quarterback, I think that there should be mistakes made. The Bills defense will be our next one. The Bills defense has really trailed off over the past 2 weeks. They've had to go up against great quarterbacks, and that's been the main thing, right? Where you had to go up against the Baltimore Ravens and the Houston Texans. In those games, you only generate 2 sacks. But in the first 3 weeks in better matchups against the Cardinals, Dolphins, and Jags, there you actually had 11 sacks through 3 weeks. The New York Jets only have an implied team total of 19 points as well. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we're going to be looking at the Raiders. The Raiders defense has been bad where they haven't forced a single fumble all year, but you are going up against Justin Fields. Should be a sloppy game as well. So I am completely fine playing the Raiders. Going up against the Carolina Panthers, you have the Atlanta Falcons. With that being said, the Falcons haven't been a great defense to play so far this season. While you did get the 2 touchdowns against the New Orleans Saints, same time, they aren't consistently generating pressures. They only have 1 total fumble recovery this year. The Chicago Bears are a great defense. The Chicago Bears have been one of the best defenses all season, where you're sitting with them 3rd in total points. However, my hesitation with this is it's a London game. And in a London game, I think that there is natural uncertainty. One team may travel well, the other team may not. Typically, I'm trying to avoid the London games if we can. But obviously, this has been a great defense, and it's not that bad of a matchup going up against the Jags. Now, those are the defenses that I'd be very excited to start. The defenses that you can start will be the Titans against the Colts, the Packers against the Cards, the Jets against the Bills. I'm starting the Niners against the Seahawks, but I'm not excited about it. And then you have the Bengals, Colts, Jags, Saints, Ravens, and Patriots after this. But honestly, I don't even know if we need to include them in the list. Really, the only defenses you want to start are the top 10 options. And then that tier of 11 through 14 are kind of desperation plays if a top 10 defense isn't available to you this week. But I appreciate you. Really hope I was able to help you out here. And of course, if you wanted to tell me on that Kyler Murray pick, higher than 33.5 rushing yards, you can find the link to Underdog Fantasy in the description as well as the comment section. If you use promo code FLOCK, you will get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Also, with code FLOCK, you will be getting a free pick. If you sign up before Thursday night, that's going to be the Brock Purdy more than less than half a total yard. You'll get a free team review over there on flockfantasy.com as well. Just make sure that you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your account on Underdog Fantasy. That way I knew who to hook up with that free team review voucher. But thank you again. I really do appreciate you and really hope we get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.